This is Hidden Killers with Tony Brewski.
Lori Daybell. Lori effing Daybell, as we like to refer to her around here. Oh my gosh, the trial is underway. I've been watching as much as I possibly can of it. We've been bringing you a lot of clips, the opening statements on both sides, and kind of breaking down stuff piece by piece. But a man who's been literally watching it play by play, Bob Motta, defense attorney, host of the podcast Defense Diaries. I'm going to throw it to you because you've seen more of this than I have thus far. What the hell's your take on it?
Well, number one, hey, what's up, T?
Hey.
It's been a minute.
Yeah.
Welcome back.
Thank you. You too.
It's boring so far.
Yes.
Is like the key kind of phrase that I can think of, the best way to describe it thus far. It's like any state case. It kind of clunks out of the gate a little bit, and they're putting on the witnesses, kind of building the timeline. And, ultimately we'll start getting into the juicier stuff in terms of the real evidence that can prove that she was a part of the conspiracy. But right now we're just, with the first responders, the first cop to the scene, hear a little bit from those folks, and then kind of like forced to listen through Lori's inane cross-examinations where it's hard to describe what she's doing. She's not, like, she's asking all these questions. It feels more like a deposition.
Yeah, like what I'm trying to put my finger on what direction she's trying to go, because I don't know that she knows what she's trying to do, where she's trying to go, or what she's trying to do.
She doesn't. She has no idea.
Yeah.
I mean, you can't.
No.
Trying a case is not easy. It's not easy for lawyers, and it's certainly not going to be easy for somebody who's tried to prep themselves in prison.
Mm-hmm.
It's going to be a very challenging endeavor for her, but do I feel any pity? Absolutely not. She made her choice. She's the smartest person in the room. So, she's going to reap what she sows through the end of this thing. And, ultimately I have very little doubt that she'll be found guilty. I will say that as far as her opening went, she was competent. I didn't think that she was like a bumbling fool up there.
Yeah.
I thought that she had a pretty linear timeline. I thought that she kind of like hit her points. You could tell that she had worked on that for a long time. You could tell her advisory council told her to use the phrase "the evidence will show" over and over and over. Like
to a fault. It was like, I think she thought she had to begin every sentence with it, no matter what, even if she was talking about evidence or not.
Right, exactly. Well, and the interesting thing is that she made a lot of promises, right? I mean, she made a lot of promises with that phrase, "the evidence will show." And I don't know how she's delivering any of that to the jury short of her testifying, because everybody that was in that home is no longer with us.
Yeah.
So, she's literally the only person who's alive that could get any of that into evidence as to what happened in that house. So, it raises the question, is she going to testify? Now, that poses a huge issue for her, because that's what brings in her criminal record, her background. If she testifies, the state gets to bring her entire criminal history in. And, whether or not these jurors know about her, it's hard to say. I imagine that some of them probably do. And, that's a real battle for her. That's just because of human nature. They're not supposed to take those convictions into consideration in terms of whether or not she's guilty of this crime, but that's not how human beings work. It's just not what we do. It's all kind of part and parcel of the same story, isn't it? It doesn't really matter that things took place at different times. It was all part of the grand scheme of things. So, whether or not the jury's aware of it, if she decides that she's going to testify, it's all coming in, it has to. So, because that's part of the deal, if you get on, because they have the ability to be able to challenge your credibility. And one of the ways of doing that is bringing in your criminal history. So,
Is that like pretty much though a guaranteed you're going to be found guilty, Lori Vallow, if you decide to testify in this? I mean, no matter, I don't see anything she's possibly going to say by testifying herself that would outweigh bringing in JJ and Tylee's death. I don't know what that could possibly be.
I agree, and it's kind of it's a double-edged sword for her, because it at the heart of it is a defense of others / self-defense type defense that she's putting on, in terms of she's claiming that her brother was defending Tylee, and that's why this whole thing went down. And short of her getting onto the stand and saying what happened in there, how is she getting that story out? You know what I mean? And it's like, if she doesn't do it, I just don't know how she's going to deliver on her side of the story at all.
There's really
nobody else in there.
There's no one that's alive that can speak to this anymore. Right. Were you surprised? I mean, no, I was a little bit surprised. Let's go back to the opening statements that we had from Lori. My bar was pretty low on this of what to expect. I was surprised actually how well she did on her opening arguments there. And I was also surprised that she didn't bring religion into it at all yet. I was expecting some, zombie-ish something in there, but she seemed to have enough competence to go, maybe not yet, or maybe not at all. I don't know. What was your reaction to that?
Yeah, same. And, the state they certainly didn't dive deep into the religious side of it either. They certainly brought up like the knee-high stuff, because they're going to tie that up, and they're going to do that with respect to what, translating what these text messages between Lori and Alex meant, and they're like, those are going to be the smoking gun evidence for them. And they're going to have to bring it in to a certain extent, whether or not it's going to be anywhere near what we saw in the first trial. I don't think so. Yeah. And I don't think that they should. I think this is a much cleaner story for the state without having to get into all of that.
Yeah.
I mean, like, they're not having to really create the narrative for the jury as to like how this mother came to ending her own 2 children's lives like they did the first time, wherein, showing kind of like where her brain had gone in its delusional state with respect to thinking that the kids were demons and they were no longer, in there, and that they were just vessels. And it was like, so, it's like, for that kind of stuff, they had to bring that in, because they had to be able to show, look, this is where her head was. Like, this is why she did it. This was her motive. And, and I mean, they charged her with, still collecting the Social Security benefits, but like, that wasn't enough money to be a true motive. Like, they had to show that she was just warped, that she, like, this is what she was thinking, that she thought the end of days were coming. She didn't think that her kids were her kids anymore. And that was the reason. Here, it's a very different case for them, in the sense that I think they have to bring a little of it in, but they don't have to bring in the full weight of it, which I think is good, because I think it'll get confusing to the jurors if they're not going to go all in. Like, that's just not a story you can kind of cherry pick a few things and throw it in there. And if you've got jurors that are not familiar with her story and the background of the case, they're going to be like, what does any of this mean? You know what I mean? Because, like, I kind of felt when I was listening to the state's opening statements that it was a little disjointed. I thought, I didn't think it was bad, but I thought it was a little hit or miss in terms of, like, is the jury able to discern what they're getting at here?
Yeah.
It's like, kind of stick on the bigger things, like, okay, well, Charles had the life insurance policy, money was the motive here, and ultimately she wanted to be with Chad. So she had these 2 things that were going on, and without really having to dive deep into the religious side of it, but I mean, there is a pretty big Mormon population in Arizona as well. Yeah. So it's not as if, you're trying to tell this story to like a Chicago jury
Mhm.
where, Mormonism and LDS isn't as big out here,
Yeah.
where you're going to have a lot of people like, what does any of this
You
mean?
get laughed out of the room. Yeah.
Right. So, I mean, we'll see how it plays out, but to me, the biggest question is going to be whether or not she's going to testify.
What's your thoughts on the story that she's presenting in her opening arguments, that it was Alex was trying to defend Tylee from a rageful Charles Vallow who was going to swing a bat at her, although there really had been no documented abuse whatsoever between Charles and the kids. And I'm wondering with that, we said nobody's around to talk about. Colby is.
Yeah, for sure. Now, I don't think Colby was living with them at
Yeah,
the time.
I know.
But we do know that Colby and Tylee talked all the time.
Yeah.
I think they were tight. So in terms of, but then that becomes a hearsay situation. How was he able to get in those
Sure.
conversations? So I mean, she represented that there was like some video that exists
Uh-huh.
as to some of these interactions between Charles and Tylee, how she's going to get those in, or if they really exist.
That's the
Again,
question. Do they
right,
exist?
right. So I mean, we're gonna have to wait and see. I mean, that's gonna have to be her story.
Hmm.
It was always, it's like, that's what I was saying. I mean, she's coming in with this defense of another situation, and I just don't know how she gets there without testifying, man. I just don't.
I don't know. I'm trying to understand what the big deal with the CPR argument has been thus far, because we've been hearing it from the state and from her. What's the point of this argument? We know he was shot. The first officer has said, when I got there, yeah, he it was not revivable. It was one of those things. It just is what it is. But there seems to be, like, I don't know where she's going with her arguments, and it may be absolutely nowhere, but it still seems to be somewhat of a focus. I mean, as of today, as of where we're at with technically day 3 of the trial as we're recording this.
Yeah, I think that her bigger purpose was there was a 47-minute gap from the time that they think that Charles was
Hmm.
shot to when Alex calls 911.
Sure.
I mean, the argument from the state certainly would be that they had to make sure that he was dead and
Hmm.
that he was not revivable before they called 911. So that's kind of their thing. And then the other part of it is that the state's going to insinuate that Alex never actually tried to do CPR on him.
Hmm.
So that's where you got into the cracking of the sternum,
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
why that kind of stuff hadn't happened, and would blood be gushing out of the wound if Alex had been performing CPR on the chest. So that was kind of her thing. She was trying to establish that they don't have any way of proving that Alex did not perform CPR, because that's a damaging fact
Hmm.
for Lori and for Alex Cox, in terms of their narrative that he shot in self-defense, and that he was directed by 911 to try to revive him, and talking him through the CPR, and the state's narrative is going to be that he didn't try anything. He just
Sure.
sat there looking at him. So that's what she was trying to get in. I think that was the purpose of a lot of her questions, was to establish that somebody who's not familiar with doing CPR and isn't, doing the compressions with the amount of pressure that you need to, that they wouldn't necessarily have broken that sternum and cracked ribs trying to press down. Whereas with first responders who know what they're doing and whose number one, goal is to get that person resuscitated,
Hmm.
oftentimes they will crack bones
Yeah.
when they're
Yeah.
trying to do it, because you're trying to get to the heart in order to get that thing pumping again. So, I think that was ultimately what her point was, because at the end of the day, it's going to be pretty damaging facts for Lori in terms of whether or not Alex actually tried to
Hmm.
resuscitate him. So, I mean, I think she did what she could. She's got obviously no medical background,
Yeah.
and her trying to cross-examine people that have knowledge and experience in doing that was pretty clunky.
Obviously, this is a conspiracy case. This is not that Lori Vallow is the one who pulled the trigger. It's that she was conspiring with her brother, Alex, who is now dead, to kill Charles Vallow. Are they going to have a difficult time proving this? Because you got to show why. Why would Alex want to do her betting? I know, bidding, motive, I know you don't have to prove, but it's kind of a big part of this in a conspiracy to show, okay, why would he do it? Why would he go kill people for Lori? How are they going to establish that in the case like this?
And that's part of the challenge for the state in this case, because they're not going to theoretically delve into all of the other parts of the story, because either they've chosen not to or because they were barred from doing it. And I mean, anybody who knows the story knows that Alex was her henchman. I mean, he was the guy doing all the dirty work for Chad and Lori. And, I mean, I think that there's a lot of people, including myself, that think that they had a hand in his untimely death from a pulmonary embolism. That I think that if you do even just a basic Google search, you can see that you can facilitate that, by basically pumping air into somebody's, it's essentially just getting an air bubble in there, and you can cause that to happen. How they're going to be able to prove it up is going to be challenging without getting that side of the story in. It's going to boil down to these text messages between Lori and Alex. That's why I was saying, that's why I think that they brought up the Nephi stuff. They're going to explain what that meant, what the significance of it is in these text messages. And that, for them, it was kind of, the lingo that they spoke, and that was, that was her giving directions, and that was her inquiring as to if things were done and, was it finished, and I mean, they're going to have to build it through circumstantial evidence that, they stayed away from the house for a very long period of time. They're at the Walgreens, and they're at the Burger King, and all those things. And you heard the strange chocolate milkshake testimony. And I think that the cop brought that up because of the amount of melting that had occurred with the shake, because it was really hot out that day. So, the cop was trying to say, well, according to the milkshake, they had been out there for a minute, or, they had just gotten back from Burger King because it was still pretty much frozen, so it's got different challenges in the first case. That's for certain.
Well, and some of it just shows how ridiculous the story is it's like, show me how ridiculous this is without showing me how ridiculous this is. You find out that your husband is dead or murdered, and you take the kids to Burger King. I mean, it's just like, I wouldn't even be taking them to school. It would be like, let's go to my friend's house today. I have to go deal with this, and then I'll come get you, and we can talk about this when we need to. It's like, take him to Burger King, take him to school, just like it's an ordinary day. And she backs it up in the opening statements of, I took them because he promised that he would take them. So I basically had to fulfill that Burger King promise.
It's when you see the interview there, like with the cop and her, and she, like, it just is not a woman who has any compassion. It's like, if you were watching that, not knowing what happened, what preceded it, you would have no idea that anybody that she knew.
You think she was like the neighbor,
right? Like, and purportedly cared about at some point in her life. I mean, she had to have cared about. They were together for a long time. You would assume that there was some point in time that she had feelings for him, and you just saw no indication of it, at all in that interview. And I'm talking about when they're standing outside of the house, and you see Tylee over there, just kind of standing there, and they're asking her questions, and she's just, chuckling and just talking about, like, it's the weirdest thing. And it just really goes to her mindset. Like, I think that's very powerful evidence in terms of the jury's going to be looking at it like, what is going on with this woman? Like, that is just not a normal human response for a situation like that to have occurred, an hour prior. It's like all those little things. It's going to be putting together all these little pieces in the circumstantial case. Again, like most cases wherein you're going to have to be able to create this picture for the jury where there's going to be holes, but when they step back and they look at the totality of the circumstances and they see the picture of the puzzle that the state's put together, even with those little holes in the story, that you still see what the full picture is. And I think they'll be able to get there. But obviously, I'm curious to see what they're going to do to be able to get that conspiracy charge like nailed, because you do have to show agreement. I mean, you have to meet each and every element. It's like I was telling Allie, because we had covered the first trial in depth.
Yeah.
And in that case, like I had always felt, I'm like, this is one of those cases where this woman's gallivanting around in Hawaii when her kids are allegedly missing and doesn't seem to have a care in the world, is out buying wedding rings, is doing all the things that she did. And I just thought that the backstory of that was going to lead the jury to the conclusion that this woman had a hand in it, without them having to meet each and every element, which is required by law. But this is one of those cases where I just didn't think that they were going to need to do it, because the jury's gonna be like, I don't care that they met each and every element. No woman that didn't have a hand in it would have been acting like that.
Sure.
Like no parent would be doing that. So, she's going down. Here, it's a little bit of a different circumstance, because again, you're not getting into all of the Tylee and JJ story, not to the extent that they did the first time. This is a like kind of an isolated incident, and and it predates all the other stuff. And like they're gonna have to just sell the concept of she wanted to be with Chad and she wanted that money, and those two things were the driving motivation for her. And they'll be able to bring in that her and Chad were married very soon after. And without her getting on the stand to put up some kind of defense and give her version of the story, I don't know how she's going to rebut it.
I don't know how she would rebut it either. I mean, we clearly know the state is going to bring in the whole Nephi thing and the whole wacky belief system there that they thought, he was possessed by Ned. I always want to say Ned Ryerson, and I know it's not. Ned Ryerson? Boom.
Who's a very religious guy.
Yeah, I know it's not Ned Ryerson from Groundhog's Day, but
or Ned Flanders.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, or Ned Flanders.
Yeah.
Why they picked Ned, I don't know. Just what came to their mind. But this is all going to be out there. This is all going to be presented, and I wonder how triggering it will be to her when this stuff is presented, on how she's going to handle anything on cross for anybody, and what is she going to do? What is she going to say? Is she going to go down that road of treating her belief system as if it is fact and everyone else in the room is crazy? That I think will be a very telling point when these sort of things get out and we get out of just the CPR area of the testimony that we're hearing about with Charles being on the ground.
Yeah, I mean that's the testimony that makes this thing worth watching.
Yeah,
is like, see, when we get to that kind of aspect of the case, how she's going to handle it. Like, is she going to go full nuts? I mean, it's like, we've heard her. I mean, her theory is that we're all wrong and she's right. She's got it from up on high, that everything that she thinks is the way that it's going to go down, and we're the ones who are nuts, and that we should believe her. So I mean, is she going to put that on display? I mean, she's got to realize that we do think that she's all nuts, and the jury is going to think she's nuts as well. So whether or not she believes in her heart of hearts and in her diseased mind that we are the crazy ones, that we're the ones who are just out of the loop because we don't believe her, is she smart enough to realize that that's not going to be an effective way to get a not guilty in this case, because insulting the jury is the first way to get yourself convicted in a case. So man, it's going to be interesting.
She obviously has her own list of witnesses that she plans on calling, at least some of them. How is there any way, shape, or form that you see any of these people helping her, or is it just going to be more folks that are going to end up sinking her on cross from the prosecution?
Anybody that was a part of the story, I can't see any of them helping her. If you've got like an expert or two, which I think that she does. Obviously, that she's going to have to lean into those folks.
Yeah.
She again, this is the challenge of going pro se.
Mhm.
It's that old axiom. The lawyer who represents themselves as a fool for a client. And she is the lawyer in this situation, and and you're too close to the situation to be able to look at things objectively. That's why you have other people represent you. You have to be able to take a step back and say, okay, well, this isn't going to work because of X, Y, and Z. And I don't think that she's going to be capable of doing that. I think that she thinks that she's going to be able to, kind of manipulate her way to whatever she needs people to say on the stand. And it's just not going to work out in her favor. But I mean, we'll see. Like she needs to have a very, very slim case.
Yeah.
Like she's like, if she thinks she's going to parade a bunch of people up there, they're going to be in any way helpful to her. I think that she's in for a rude awakening.
Yeah, less is more with her, I would think. At the end of the day, when the jury does get this, let's say that she never does testify. We never end up hearing anything about Tylee or JJ or her past criminal acts, and they're discussing this. Let's say some of the jurors do know about the past a bit. Are they allowed to discuss any of that in the jury room at the end of like, well, I do know this about this, or do they have to completely keep it strictly to the evidence that was presented in this case, whether they have any knowledge of anything in the past or not, to enlighten maybe those who don't?
Yeah, no, they have to stick to the facts and evidence that were presented. You can't bring in anything else that wasn't part of the case in chief of either side. You can't do it.
Yeah.
So, but again, what you can and can't do.
They're humans.
Deliberation, right. I mean, that's the thing. It's like,
that's what I'm wondering though. Like if it does get brought up somehow, somebody's discussing, they're like, well, she also killed her kids. What? Is there any safeguards to prevent that from happening in the conversation in the jury room? Is there anybody there that's a third party that can be like, whoa, this is not part of the case. We can't be doing hearsay of what you heard. Or does this just, I don't know how that works technically.
Yeah, technically, no, there is no safeguard. There is no, like when they're back there alone. There's nobody back there with them. And there is, if somebody brings it up and you've got, you can't unring a bell situation happens back there, it happens.
Could that be looked at as prejudicial? Like if later after everything is done and if she tries to do an appeal on this, I don't know if she will, but because it's her. But let's say that we found out that somebody did bring this up in jury when they're deliberating. Could that be looked at as, wait a second, this should not have happened. They brought this up. They weren't supposed to. That constitutes this wasn't a fair trial because a juror introduced prejudicial information to other jurors in the jury room.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah.
It could definitely, the question is, how's she finding that out? Because like none of the jurors are going to be chatting with her.
Yeah, I mean, if somebody speaks out in an interview later, something like that, where like, then they talked about this, because inevitably some of these folks are going to talk and they're going to share their experience and write a book or whatever. So, I mean, if that comes out that happened, there's just, it seems like a very open and shut case, but it seems like there's a lot of pitfalls here that people could fall in as well, just to play by the rules. So we don't have that sort of issue. But again, people are human that you don't sometimes even know where the pits are.
Well, you hope that there's at least one juror back there that's like a rule follower.
Yeah.
Say, whoa.
Yeah.
Whoa. You can't bring that up. We can't consider that at all.
Mm-hmm.
And that cures the issue. That ultimately the juror is going to have to say, well, I mean, it was brought up, but it didn't play into why we convicted her. I mean, like that's ultimately what it's going to have to boil down to. If somebody lets slip that came out in deliberations, that her sordid background makes its way into the deliberation room and people learn of things that they didn't learn through the trial, it's going to, it would get dealt with. I don't think that it would ever succeed in any way, shape, or form, especially, if you've got a juror who's going to say, all right, look, we can't consider that, because they get an instruction on it. I mean, the safeguard is that they get a jury instruction on it that you're not to consider anything that wasn't brought up in trial in terms of the facts and the evidence that was presented to you. You can't bring up anything that people may know from outside sources. It's not a part of this equation.
Yeah.
And as long as you've got a juror or two or more back there that are like, we can't consider that. You know, like, I get it. I hear what you're saying, but that has nothing to do with this case. I think it'll be fine.
It will be interesting.
Craving non-stop true crime updates? Press subscribe now and get the latest cases, analysis, and expert commentary delivered straight to your feed. Only from the Hidden Killers podcast and True Crime Today.